Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Alexander the Great Part 3 by Epic History TV. Last time we saw as Alexander conquered more of the western territory of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, including Egypt, a country with a lot of history, a lot of culture, and a lot of wealth. Now we see as Alexander continues eastwards. Now, if you guys end up enjoying this episode, I would appreciate it if you would check out my Patreon, which is linked in the description down below, and will give you access to exclusive content. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction. Alright, part 3.
In 334 BC, Alexander, 21-year-old ruler of the small Greek kingdom of Macedonia, led an invasion of the vast Persian Empire.
The Greek kingdom of Macedonia that his father had really built up from obscurity into a very prominent regional power. Now we see as Alexander takes that regional power and turns it into a world power, conquering an amazing amount of territory.
It seemed impossible odds. But thanks to Greek military dominance and Alexander's fearless leadership, he won 2 great battles against the Persians.
And it really is a sort of familiar story. I think of, and this comparison isn't perfect, but I think of, say, Frederick the Great and his father. His father had sort of cautiously built up Prussia into a regional power. He'd built up its military. He had made it into a force to be reckoned with, and then his son, Frederick the Great, took what his father had built and expanded it to a global level. Now this example is sort of on a far, far wider level, but some similar ideas. Alexander's father, Philip, had built up Macedonia, in particular built up the military, made it this powerful regional country with a rather powerful military. Alexander takes that and he expands. He uses what his father gave him to accomplish these very impressive conquests.
At the river Granicus and at Issus. Having subdued Persian lands west of the Euphrates River, he now headed east into the empire's heartlands, seeking...
And I've been saying this for several episodes now. I mean, we're on episode 3. And I keep saying, Alexander is taking some important territory, but he's not in the Persian heartland. Well, everybody, now that's where he is. He's moving into the Persian heartland. So if, you're the Achaemenid Persian Empire, it's starting to get real serious for you. Alexander is becoming a really major threat.
A final showdown with the Persian king, Darius III. Receiving news that a great Persian army led by Darius had assembled at Gaugamela, near modern Mosul in Iraq, he made straight for it. This was Darius's last chance to stop Alexander.
Yeah, and to be fair, we've already seen that in terms of leadership, Alexander is way ahead of Darius, or Darius, however you want to pronounce it. Alexander is a true leader. He will lead from the front. He will get involved in the battlefield. Darius, like, to be honest, a fairly typical emperor of such a massive span of prosperous territory, he leads from the back. And when things start to get a little messy, he'll get himself out of there. Alexander is not one to do that. He is not afraid of being right in the middle of the fighting. So we've seen their leadership compared before. Now Darius has, like they said, one last chance to stop Alexander from moving even further into Persian territory.
And Alexander's chance to smash Persian power once and for all.
Gaugamela? Not sure if that's pronounced correctly.
Darius had chosen to fight on open ground, where his advantage in numbers would be more telling. His soldiers had also worked hard to clear and flatten the terrain.
Okay, so once again, another situation where the Persians have chosen the battlefield, and they've chosen a battlefield that is to their advantage, which makes sense. Up until this point, it hasn't really worked out for them. Alexander has managed to completely ignore any advantages they have and win regardless. Let's see if he can do the same this time.
To make it suitable for Persian war chariots. By modern estimates, the Persian army was between 50 and 80,000 strong, and made up of contingents from across the empire. Infantry from Syria and Babylonia. Cavalry from Armenia, India, and Central Asia.
Wow. So, I mean, once again, we've talked about how these armies of these powerful states or large empires would pull a wide variety of soldiers from a diverse variety of backgrounds. I mean, we're seeing that here, a lot of different people groups serving in the Persian Empire. We have some interesting combatants here. We have Indians, shows you just how far east Persian influence extended. Also Bactrians, so we're talking about, Central Asia. I mean, it really shows you the breadth of the Persian Empire, all the different peoples they can draw on to help them fight this battle.
Up to 200 scythed chariots. Even a handful of war elephants. Alexander's army was smaller and may have been outnumbered by as much as 2 to 1.
Wow.
He deployed his units in their usual formation. On the left flank, Thracian and Thessalian cavalry, commanded by Parmenion. In the center, the Macedonian veterans of the phalanx, each armed with their 18-foot sarissa pike.
The reliable phalanx, the cavalry led by Parmenion. With Alexander's army, we're getting sort of the same people fighting time and time again. He may be outnumbered, but he has got some disciplined, hardy veterans under his command.
On the right flank, Alexander with his elite cavalry, the companions, and his best infantry, the hypaspists.
Yep. Similar setup to what we've seen before. Nothing too different.
These were the units with which Alexander planned to launch his main attack. Greek hoplites formed a second line and supported both wings, which were angled back to guard against encirclement by the Persians.
And of course, given that Alexander is outnumbered, unclear by how much he was outnumbered because we don't know what numbers to believe. How big were these armies actually? We don't know. Contrasting sources. Also, ancient historians love to over-exaggerate. But what we do know is Alexander is outnumbered, though he has been several times before, but he does have to worry about being encircled. That's a real big concern if you're dealing with a numerically superior opponent. Of course, unless you're Hannibal, then you just encircle your opponent, even though they have more troops. But still a concern, of course.
The battle began when Alexander led his wing out to the right, a move that took the Persians by surprise.
Oh.
Could Alexander really be trying to encircle their huge army? The Persians mirrored his movement, taking troops away from their center to outflank Alexander and prevent him leaving the area they'd cleared for the Persian chariots. But Alexander's unusual maneuver was a trap to entice the Persians to weaken their center.
Brilliant. Once again, these are tactics that are familiar to us, but you don't necessarily have to have the most complicated plan of all time for it to work. What you need is a plan that makes sense and a plan that you can execute. That is the most important part, is actually executing your plan. What that takes is some impressive leadership, some well-disciplined soldiers, and some good organization. So what we're seeing here, Alexander isn't pulling a Hannibal and trying to encircle his opponent, who is numerically superior to him, but what he is doing is drawing those Persian troops away from the center, which gives Hannibal's tough core, the phalanx, a chance to push through right in the middle. Once again, it's not necessarily the most sneaky or brilliant tactic of all time, but it's a good one, and if you can execute it well, that's all you need.
When he saw that it had worked, he ordered his Greek cavalry to charge, to keep the Persians fixed in position. A giant cavalry battle developed on the right wing. Darius, meanwhile, judging this to be the decisive moment, unleashed his chariots. But expert Agrianes javelin throwers took out horses and crews.
Nice.
While the Greek infantry opened lanes, allowing the chariots to pass harmlessly through.
Yeah, I mean, if your men are well trained and ready for this sort of attack, then they can effectively respond. And this is a tactic we see many times throughout history if we're talking about chariots or perhaps cavalry. You know, just open up a gap in your lines. If your men are able to do that, then you lessen the impact of that charge to a very high degree.
Now Alexander led his companion cavalry and parts of the Macedonian phalanx in a headlong charge straight at the weakened Persian center, fighting his way towards Darius himself.
All right, yeah, the companion cavalry, numerically not super large, but, you know, Alexander's best men, these best trained, most skilled fighters. There aren't many of them, but they can make a big, big impact in the thick of battle.
The sudden ferocity of Alexander's assault threw the Persians into panic. The center of the army broke and ran. King Darius himself leading the rout.
Yep. Once again, Darius is running away when the battle gets tough.
Alexander's left wing was in serious trouble.
Uh-oh.
Parmenion, facing a huge onslaught by Persian cavalry, was virtually surrounded. Indian and Scythian horsemen had even ridden through a gap in the Greek line. But rather than wheeling and attacking the Greeks from behind, they'd carried straight on to loot their camp. Parmenion sent a desperate appeal to Alexander for help.
All right. Let's see if our boy Parmenion can make it through. Also, a little note on discipline, not just in ancient times, but throughout history, really up to the very modern professionalization of militaries, looting has been a big, big problem. You need to have some real well-disciplined men to prevent them from trying to loot in the middle of the battle. Because if you think about it from a soldier's perspective, if you've managed to charge through, well, you certainly don't want to die, and you can get an opportunity to remove yourself from the combat and also make yourself rich beyond belief. A lot of men will take that. So this is a very common problem throughout the entirety of military history.
The king abandoned his pursuit of Darius, regrouped, and charged the Persian right wing.
All right.
It was the hardest and bloodiest fighting of the battle, claiming the lives of 60 of Alexander's companions.
And like we said, it's not necessarily a massive force, the companion cavalry. And so even losing what might seem like a relatively small number of men, given the larger context, can be a pretty big deal, a big loss.
Finally, as news of Darius's flight spread across the battlefield, the last Persian horseman turned and fled.
Yep, and we talked about this last time. If you're in charge, especially if you're some sort of king, you know, your people have some loyalty to you, and you leave the field, that is real, real bad for the morale of your men.
The Battle of Gaugamela was a stunning and complete victory for Alexander. According to ancient sources, he lost just a few hundred men, while the Persians lost thousands.
Yeah, once again, a lot of these sources are fairly unreliable, but I'm absolutely willing to buy the idea that the Persians lost way more men than Alexander did. This was a very stunning victory for Alexander, and a pretty devastating loss for the Persians.
Alexander had routed Darius's great army. And now the road to Babylon, the empire's main capital, lay open. The Macedonian king entered the great city in...
And to my understanding, this is really the start of the decline or even collapse of the Achaemenid Empire. I mean, we've already seen they've been in decline, but after this battle, they really don't stand a chance. Alexander is skating through.
In triumph, recognized by Persian officials as its new rightful ruler.
There you go.
So too at the city of Susa, where Alexander ceremonially took his seat upon the royal throne of Persia. In the Zagros Mountains, at a pass known as the Persian Gates, a courageous Persian force held up Alexander's army for a month.
Wow.
The Greeks eventually found a mountain path that bypassed their position, allowing them to encircle and wipe out the defenders.
Hey, and though this didn't end up helping the Persians in the end, we get a little look at the importance of local geography. In this case, we're talking about the Zagros Mountains. If you're looking at Persian history, and I mean more broadly, not just the Achaemenid Empire, but, you know, any type of Persian history, we can look at the Parthians or the Sassanids or whatever, the Zagros Mountains are a very important geographical feature. You know, in many ways, they're sort of cutting the empire into two, because, especially at this point, those mountain crossings can take a long time and be very difficult. So, something interesting to think about.
In early 330 BC, Alexander reached Persepolis, the empire's ceremonial capital. Alexander wanted to appear as a liberator to the Persians, as a legitimate successor to King Darius. But now he ordered Persepolis to be pillaged and burnt. Retribution for the Persian invasion of Greece and the burning of Athens' sacred temples in 480 BC.
Yeah, and, you know, we see Alexander's mean streak again, another act of brutality. Not uncommon for the era. I mean, this is in response to another act of brutality, but, you know, we see how this features in the warfare of the time. Alexander is not afraid to get his hands dirty, burn down towns, massacre innocents, take people into slavery, all that sort of stuff. Once again, that's sort of how the time period was, but we are getting a look at it.
Alexander now headed north into Media, where Darius had taken refuge in the royal city of Ecbatana. Alexander was determined to capture Darius, but the fugitive king fled east in the hope of raising a new army in the provinces of Parthia, Bactria, and Sogdia. It was not to be. As Alexander closed in, the Persian king was murdered by one of his own governors, Bessus, who then proclaimed himself the empire's new ruler.
I mean, hey, as we can see when we look at Persian history or Greek history or Roman history, I mean, I'm using examples from ancient history in particular, but this is really true much more broadly. When everything starts to go wrong, I should say, your country falls into chaos, a lot of people start seeing opportunities opening up, and it becomes very dangerous to be in a position of authority, because you don't know who is actually loyal to you and who thinks, well, you know what, maybe I should just kill you and take your place myself, and we'd be better off that way. I mean, everything's in chaos anyway, why not? These are the sort of opportunities that open up in a time like that.
Alexander gave orders for Darius to be buried in the royal tombs of Persepolis, alongside his ancestors.
Right, and surely that's because, as we've seen, they just mentioned it in this video, but we also saw it when he conquered Egypt, Alexander is trying to frame himself as a legitimate ruler. We got a lot of examples of that with Egypt doing these ceremonies, meeting important people. They just mentioned it here. And so even though he wasn't an opponent of Darius, he wants to put him to rest respectfully, portray himself as a successor to Darius. It might seem like an interesting thing to do, but once again, there's lots of examples throughout history of, someone murders the emperor and then respectfully puts them to rest. Now, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they try and disgrace their memory, but other times it's a little more complicated. When you're someone like Alexander, you want to claim that legitimacy. So in some ways, you have to adapt to the local culture, the local politics, all that sort of stuff.
Then he paused to organize his vast new empire.
Right, yeah.
Alexander appointed viceroys to rule the provinces on his behalf, keeping several Persians who had sworn loyalty in their posts. Then he resumed his march east.
Yup.
His goal to find and kill the usurper Bessus.
He's not done yet.
Subjugate the empire's eastern provinces.
I mean, he's taken, as we can see from this map, probably the majority of the Persian Empire. And he's taken the most prosperous regions of the Persian Empire, not to mention, of course, he still holds ancient Greece, which the Persians never quite could. But he's not done yet. He wants to go all the way eastwards, and he's going to continue.
And reach the far edge of the world.
Yes. The far end of his world, of course. Alright. Yes, you'll reach the far end of his world. Sometimes I think we talk about the known world, it's a little silly because, Asia was known. It was just known by different groups of people. So I don't really like the term known world. It seems a little odd to refer to a certain section of the world as the known world when, most of the rest of the world was also known, right? Anyway, yes, Alexander wants to go further than ever before, further than even the Persians could. That's his goal. I guess we'll see if he achieves it. That would be truly incredible. We have one more part left in this series, so we'll see what happens. We'll see how Alexander's journey ends. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I certainly did. I've been enjoying this series. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, check out the Patreon, all that good stuff. Now, I hope you guys are all having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.